I wrote up this really fancy speech. Scott told me keep it to, or Peter rather, told me keep it to 10 minutes. But I thought maybe what I would do, rather than bore you with some canned presentation, is just talk a little bit about some things regarding my past, near past, and also back years ago, because I'm really old. I'm 65. And I went to Wisconsin a week ago this past Friday and protested with the folks there by the thousands, as Scott said, or as Peter said.
A lot of people think I look like Scott Walker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That might be a reason to get plastic surgery. So, after a while, you know, you run around chanting and shaking your sign, which I've done a lot over the years, starting with the Civil Rights Movement. And pretty soon you find it more interesting just to talk to folks. There was a gentleman sitting over outside the Capitol with an American flag. And I went over to him and I said, "Hi, I'm Jim Jacobs. I'm from Galesburg, Illinois." And he says, "Hi, I'm Ken Miller. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota." And I said, "Came over for the protest, huh?" And he says, "Yeah." He said, "I've been over here every single day." He said, "I've got to stand up for my union brothers and sisters." I said, "Well, what did you do for a living, Ken?" I said, I'm a retired school teacher. I taught fifth grade students social studies and language arts. He says, "I'm a retired police officer." I went on, and after visiting with Ken, I met George and Mary Schultz from Dodgeville, near Dodgeville, Wisconsin. And Mary's a special ed teacher. And George, he worked for the United Auto Workers. Said, "I'm here to stand up for my union brothers and sisters because the wealth it's getting concentrated amongst the top 1% and 2% in the country, and that's because of the demise of unions." And then I talked to some of the police officers that were around there at the Capitol. Nice folks. I think they felt bad that they had to be there on duty to control the crowd, because some of them that were off duty came to protest. And some of the firefighters, many of them came to protest. And what are we protesting about? Why was I there? I think Peter set it up very well. You know, there was a study done, commissioned by President Hoover, to just determine what life was like for the average American around 1930. Of course, that was when the Depression had just started. The name of the study is Recent Social Trends in the United States, and what it found was that the vast majority of the American workers were non-union. They worked in horrendous conditions, toiling long hours for a pittance which they had to beg for. They could be fired at will. They could be subject to harassment by the petty notions of foremen and supervisors. And that's the good news. Those were the industrial workers in the big city. The farm workers, who have never really been unionized, even though there have been noble attempts to do that, lived in abject poverty. Back in 1930, the average farm worker did not even come close to making the average household income for the United States. Only 16% of them did. And I think it can be best summed up to describe their lot by Erskine Caldwell, the novelist, when he visited the shack of a Georgia sharecropper who had 3 families shoved into 2 rooms in that shack. And Caldwell said over on one side was a little boy, maybe as old as 6 years old, licking a meat wrapper. And there out in front of an open fire were two little babies, less than a year old, stark naked, both of them sucking on the tits of a bitch dog. That was the life of the farm worker. And it was a life that was destitute and hard, and in many ways, in some places, still is. When unions came along, things got a lot better. In his Pulitzer Prize-winning book called Freedom from Fear, David M. Kennedy says unions made a big difference. Once the Wagner Act was passed in 1935 and workers across the country could unionize, that meant that they could go to the bargaining table, they could sit down, they could demand that the company open its books so that they could see what the profits of the company were, and they could say, we deserve our fair share because we helped you make these profits. They could get a better wage, wages rose. The seniority provision made employment predictable, especially for older workers who were often let go in non-union shops. They could also file grievances against foremen and supervisors who were not treating them fairly. And it became a better life, and I'm going to tell you what happened. We created the great American middle class. But of course, over the past several decades, the private sector unions have been under siege by the anti-union movement. In fact, there was a person who wrote in our newspaper not long ago, the Galesburg Register-Mail, that said, oh, we took a wrong turn 80 years ago. We need to get back to the way it was. And I suppose that person was talking about, one, Social Security, and another thing, the Wagner Act. But as the anti-union movement has been able to bust unions by moving, corporations moving to low-wage markets, by passing so-called right-to-work laws. And now, whereas in 1960, 1 out of every 3 workers in non-farm labor was a union member, today, 1 out of every 14 in the private sector. But unions haven't died. Where they have increased is in the public sector. And I want to talk very briefly about that because I was a public sector union member for almost 3 decades. I was a member of the American Federation of Teachers. And let's talk specifically about teachers and what Governor Walker wants to accomplish in Wisconsin. You know, Peter wasn't exaggerating when he said he wants to bust unions. It's about unions. If you don't believe me, just go and get online and read that conversation that he had when he was punked by the Buffalo Beast, and he thought he was talking to David Koch, the millionaire anti-union guy. The guy pretending to be Koch says, "You're the first domino." And Walker says, "Yep, this is our moment." Then the guy laughs later and he says, "Well, I'll tell you what, Scott. Once you crush these bastards, I'll fly you out to Cali and really show you a good time." Walker says, "All right, that would be outstanding." First domino, our moment, that would be a great to party in Cali. It's noteworthy also that Governor Walker didn't correct the person he thought was David Koch when he referred to public union employees as bastards. What's more, because a large percentage of union membership in the public sector is teachers, the anti-union forces especially want to bust the 2 major unions, the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers, and take us back to the way it used to be. Now, how did it used to be? The late Albert Shanker, who was president of the American Federation of Teachers, told how New York City teachers back in the good old days, as Walker and Koch might say, made less,
I think you're doing that now.
probably, made less, made less than people who washed cars, were forced to supervise students while trying to eat their lunch, had huge class sizes and were made to bring a doctor's note when they were out sick, were subject to the whims of the school administration and had few benefits, could be fired without cause and dared not complain. Those are the good old days they'd like to return to. However, it's not only what abolishing collective bargaining would do to teachers, because as Peter said, the unions have said, we'll give you what you want, Governor, on pensions and on our health care, but you're not going to take away our right to sit down and bargain with our school districts. After all, you've got, I've lost my place, I apologize. It's not only just about abolishing collective bargaining. The propaganda coming from the anti-union movement is that unions in education hurt education. But my experience tells me that's simply not true. Prior to the teachers' unions in Galesburg, class sizes were much larger. I can testify to that because I not only taught in Galesburg, but I went to school there. My sixth grade class had over 40 students in it, with one teacher making it virtually impossible for her to get around to assist struggling students. Collective bargaining by the Galesburg Education Association put a stop to that, capping class size to a reasonable number. Also, ending collective bargaining would slap a target on the backs of the most experienced teachers because they are the teachers that get the most money. Letting them go may save the district money in the short term, but losing their experience and expertise would exact a heavy cost in the long run. They will not be there to mentor new teachers. Their wealth of ideas and strategies will leave with them when they are dismissed. And who really pays the cost to save those few dollars? It's the kids and it's society. An end to collective bargaining would also put a chill on teachers offering up new ideas or constructive criticisms. After all, what teacher is going to stick his or her neck out and risk alienating his or her principal? At the same time, an end to collective bargaining will heighten the impact of personality or political conflicts between teachers and administrators. You know, it's a romantic idea to think that you're going to get judged simply by the merits of your work. But I have news for you that there are all kinds of little things that enter into a job evaluation sometimes that have nothing to do with the performance on the job. However, the most important question is this: what is Governor Walker's ultimate plan for education in Wisconsin? Once class size increases and Wisconsin drops from being ranked second among states with the highest mean ACT and SAT scores, will he then argue that Wisconsin public schools aren't measuring up and want to privatize them with a voucher plan? I have a feeling that what Governor Walker wants to do is more than bust unions. And just yesterday, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel came out with an article saying that Walker wants to increase the voucher plan in Milwaukee. Governor Walker, like many people, think that we need to turn back the clock, flip back the calendar, not just in Wisconsin, but across the nation. After all, he believes that this is his moment, that he's the first domino. If public employees are stripped of their collective bargaining rights, regressive forces will have all but accomplished their goal of taking us back to the bad old days. Thanks.